Story 1. Although it does not fully meet the question, I have an email address that is more than 25 years old. Story 2. My Texas Instruments TI-83 calculator from 20 years ago is still the easiest thing to use when I need to quickly calculate something. Story 3. I have a hacksaw that was probably made in the 1860s, which is superior to any hacksaw you can buy today. Also, there is a vise I periodically use that was probably made around the 1770s. Story 4. Not sure if this counts as technology or not, but I inherited my grandmother's stand mixer. It is still going strong despite being older than me by at least a couple of decades, and I am in my 40s. Story 5. The car in my garage, which I have driven twice this week and 6 times in the past 2 weeks, was built in 1970. It still has points and condenser ignition and mechanical fuel injection. Across the street, there is a man with a 1963 Triumph. If someone electromagnetic pulse attacks the eastern seaboard, we will have the only running cars in the neighborhood. Story 6. I bought a house constructed in 1900. The oil furnace is still from the 60s or 70s. It is about the size of a small Buick. Story 7. 95 Corolla. Bought for $900 because it is not attractive and has been in a minor fender bender. However, it only has 80,000 miles, the air conditioning works, and it gets great gas mileage. Story 8. A remarkable Morse sewing machine. It looks like Mighty Mouse could have owned it. It was built in a Japanese Toyota factory in the 1960s. It had a ton of new features for its time, which were all cam-based. Nothing is cam-based anymore as everything went electronic within the following decade. Therefore, it was basically the last generation of new technology for cams before becoming obsolete. It still works fine. I just put on a pair of jeans I fixed last week. Story 9. Currently, in my home, there is a prototype solar hot water system that also functions as the heat source. It was made in 1977, and my system was installed in 1980. It is a prototype because the heat exchanger is made of pure silicon and was used on the space shuttles in the 1960s. Yes, it is the same heat exchanger as the space shuttles. The engineer on the solar team was a NASA engineer in the heating division. He branched off and worked with a company that received government grants to create a sustainable energy system in the mid-1970s. The only service it had was in 2014, which included a good cleaning, system bleed, and new hot water tanks. It is still using the original circulation pump, and our heating bill in winter is $10 in electricity per month. It can still sustain 120 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit in winter and 130 to over 140 degrees Fahrenheit in summer for our hot water. Story 10. I have a hand plane from just after the Civil War that has been used to build a solid portion of the furniture and cabinets in my home. Story 11. My big old brick of a film camera, the Mamiya RB67, is a late 1970s to early 1980s model that still works like new. I still shoot film with it and make prints in the darkroom with no pixels or digital elements at all. There's really nothing to upgrade in those old cameras. They are fully mechanical and have no batteries or electronics. Story 12. It is technically my mother's, but she has a can opener she got in around 1985. It is a swing-away brand, and I have a similar model made in the 2010s that isn't nearly as sturdy. I love that can opener. It has been de-rusted a couple of times, but it never jams or catches, even on dented cans. She is leaving it to me in her will. Story 13. I still have a landline phone at my house, but I never actually use it. I keep it around for emergencies. Story 14. My Magnavox alarm clock radio. I got it for college back in the late 1990s. The radio still works, and the bright green display is still my go-to for telling the time. Story 15. An old Toyota hybrid. It's nearly 2 decades old. Costs essentially nothing in depreciation and fuel, is as reliable as an AK-47, and does everything a car needs to do. Story 16. I have a Stanley level from 1913 that my great-great-grandpa bought. It is hardwood with brass inserts and well-worn from use. I have many newer levels, but it hangs on my wall as a keepsake. Occasionally, I grab it and use it because the other ones are in the garage. Story 17. My original Nintendo Entertainment System. I will turn it on every once in a while and go crazy at how difficult those games still are. Story 18. Up until recently, I had a blow dryer from around 1998. I think I paid $15 or $20 for it. The thing was a tank, heavy as could be, survived about 9 moves, not taken care of at all, but worked like a charm every day. My girlfriend moved in and asked to use my blow dryer. I got it out for her and she laughed, saying it looked like it was from the 1990s and jokingly asked if it was older than I was. I hadn't really thought about it before, but I laughed and told her it was from the 1990s and probably one of the oldest things I owned. No joke, halfway through using it, the blow dryer shut off, something it had never done before. It refused to turn back on. I gave it a couple of days and a few tries before accepting that it was dead. I have been jokingly poking fun at my girlfriend, saying she hurt its feelings so badly that it died. Story 19. I have a little wind-up pocket watch from the 1970s that still keeps time pretty well. It only loses about 1 minute per week. Technically, it is considered obsolete, but it does its job and doesn't require batteries. You cannot do that with a smartphone. Story 20. My body, all original parts, some parts are coming to the end of their usefulness and others could do with a replacement, but it still runs well and looks good for its age. Story 21. Vintage lenses adapted on a mirrorless digital body turn out that some lenses from the 1970s still hold up to modern standards and can resolve incredibly sharp images. Story 22. My daily driver is a 1978 Chevrolet C10. Not sure that it qualifies as technology, though. It has no computers or anything. Story 23. Not sure if it is considered technology, but I have my grandmother's KitchenAid mixer from the late 1960s. I also have a cake platter music box that spins and plays Happy Birthday from around the same time period. Story 24. My corded Panasonic RP HTX 7 headphones I've had since college. I hate all other headphones. These things are perfect. Story 25. Our home phone number has been active for over 50 years and is still going strong. When we ceased using the landline, we transferred that number to a wireless phone. Story 26. For me, it is probably my Kindle Touch from 2012 and my Audio-Technica 80H M40X headphones that I have owned for 7 years. Admittedly, the swivel arms are broken, but I zip-tied them together 4 years ago and have not thought about it since. Story 27. Boston Acoustics computer speakers with a subwoofer that I bought with my Gateway computer in 1997. These speakers still sound amazing, and they almost make overpaying for a computer all those years ago worth it. Story 28. Well, it doesn't work right now because the screen is broken. It is an easy fix. I just haven't done it yet. But I have the best iPhone ever made. The iPhone 4S. Story 29. My Samsung ML4500 printer, which is the only printer I have, was bought in 2000. It runs off an Intel NetPort Express, which converts a parallel, Centronics, port to a networked printer. The NetPort has a 386SL chip inside it. The printer still works in 2025, including toner, which you can just top up from any bottle of toner. The only part one have replaced was a paper feed roller that had worn down from a thick, chunky, geared piece of rubber with huge teeth to a tiny, thin, shiny, smooth band of rubber. I got a new one and honestly didn't believe it could be the right part, but it was. It's nowhere close to being the oldest piece of technology one still own, as I have an AMD processor hung on my wall, but it is the oldest one in active use still. The problem is that anything old is absolutely obsolete, primarily due to security concerns, if nothing else. The NetPort Express cannot be exposed to the internet as it would be compromised in seconds. However, it still works even with modern Windows. My ZX Spectrums, however, are completely dead because the memory was cheap and shoddy, and it always fails. Even one that was replaced with modern memory chips, and a lot of soldering and wires, failed too. It is not worth trying to keep them running. I also have an International Business Machines ThinkPad 360 with a floppy drive from the early 1990s that still works fine on Windows 3.1 with Word for Windows version 6.0, I think. I can't remember. I have a PCMCIA Wi-Fi card, a PCMCIA Ethernet card, and a PumpShia 56K modem for it. For some years, It ran my parents' house when I lived at home as a router using FreeSCO single floppy Linux router operating system to serve the entire network and provide shared access to the modem and later broadband. I am surprised the drive hasn't died, but otherwise that machine will most likely outlive me. I presume there is an integrated drive electronics drive inside, so in theory, I could replace it with a solid-state drive or non-volatile memory express drive with an adapter, but it keeps on running, so I guess I will just let it be. Story 30. iPod Shuffle. That device was invaluable during deployments with no phone service. I loaded up about 200 songs before I left, all at no cost. I hope to keep it forever. Story 31. My record player, streaming is great, but there's something about vinyl records that is better to me. Story 32. I have a Casio 437 calculator watch I got in the 1980s that still works perfectly. It must be a special edition because there is a little game on it that I do not see in any of the images. Story 33. Grandfather's pocket watch. It was bought in 1946. I am going to say it is not obsolete because it still works as a watch even if pocket watches are out of fashion, and it could be fitted with a strap if you wanted to make a wristwatch out of it. Story 34. My grandfather's old slide rule from his days as an engineer. If he were still alive, he would be about 120 years old by now. I have no idea how old the slide rule is, but it still works perfectly. Story 35. I have a Gruen precision mechanical watch. It has radium on the dial, so it was probably made in the late 1950s. Still runs, but it does need a little work. After a service, it should run fine. Story 36. My fridge was in this house long before my parents bought it. They purchased the house roughly 30 years ago. It still works perfectly. Story 37. I have a film camera from 1957 that is still functional, but you can probably argue that being 35mm film makes it obsolete. Under those circumstances, my 1994 Chevrolet still does truck stuff well enough. Story 38. 1945 Omega wristwatch. I do not wear it daily, but it runs fine every time. I had to sell my 1943 M1 Carbine a few months ago, unfortunately. Currently listening to jazz music on a 1980s portable FM radio. Story 39. I own an antique conformateur machine from the late 1800s. Made in Paris, France from pure ebony with mother-of-pearl inlays, this machine is used to measure the shape and size of your head perfectly. I use this machine and its counterpart, the 4 million, nearly every day as a hat maker, and it works just as well as the day it was first made about 140 years ago. Story 40. Not sure exactly what qualifies as obsolete, but I do have a few very old clocks in my home. I just wind them up once in a while, and they keep ticking away. Story 41. Most of my kitchen appliances, including a fridge, stove, mixer, and dishwasher, are over 40 years old. Most of my musical instruments are from the 1970s and are still in perfect working order. I have 78 revolutions per minute records from the 1940s that can still play, but I will not play them because they sound terrible. Story 42. I have a Sony mini disc player and recorder. It has been all over the place with me. It is a bit of a hassle to get music onto it, but the digital to analog converter is so much better than my phone and Bluetooth headset. Story 43. My great-grandmother's maple rolling pin, probably. My husband's cast iron pans that he inherited might be older, but I am not sure. Story 44. I have a Winchester Model 1894 dating from 1901. It is in perfect working order and a dream to shoot. I also have a London-made nautical compass from around 1800, likely used in the British Navy. It works great, but I do not have a boat at the moment, and it is not very practical for land use. Story 45. One 1975 dual model 1245 turntable and record changer, and my collection of 3,000 jazz, rock, blues, and classical records. Story 46. My wife has a boombox Panasonic RX CT900 that she got as a teenager in the early 1990s. She has taken good care of it, and it still works like a champ. Story 47. My great-grandfather's old farm dates back to the early 1900s. He said he only ever used it to purify water for farm use, but I have my suspicions. Story 48. The entire aviation industry relies on every airport office having a load of 8-pin or 16-pin dot matrix printers. They do not make them anymore, and spare parts are impossible to find. If something breaks, we just duct tape it back together and occasionally hit it, and they work fine. Story 49. I got a cool percolator from the late 1970s and early 1980s. I brew coffee with it every day. It makes some good coffee. Story 50. My good old Gateway PC tower from 2015. It was a high-spec one, so it runs current games very well and is more powerful than every new laptop in the house. Story 51. My dad's 1999 gold Ford Ranger was left to me when he passed. It is the most reliable vehicle I have ever owned. Story 52. My email address. I created it in 2000. Also, my Mac A118 white MacBook. It still works. I can't connect to the internet though, but it still has Microsoft Word and PowerPoint. Story 53. Not sure it counts as tech, but my 1979 Maytag dishwasher is still going strong. Those advertisements were right. Story 54. Whether or not this is obsolete is debatable, but I have a Hallicrafters S53A shortwave receiver that works well and sounds as good as the medium permits. The manufacture date stamped on it is April 1950, so it is rapidly approaching its 75th birthday. Story 55. I have an electric drill made by Black & Decker that is almost 75 years old. The Black & Decker U100 still works, and I still use it. Story 56. Are we talking purchase date, manufacture date, or invention date? Because my Lamy Safari isn't exactly ancient on its own, but a fountain pen is pretty old technology. Story 57. My pair of Juster computer speakers. Also, the phone I am using to type all this is a decade-old HTC. Story 58. My Logitech Z635.1 system and my Klipsch Promedia 5.1 THX speaker system are both devices I have had since 2006. One is connected to my television system, where I have gone through 4 televisions. The other is connected to my gaming personal computer, which I have upgraded and replaced the motherboard, graphics card, and processor on at least 8 times. In fact, I have 2 Z630 systems and use the speakers from my other system to turn it into a 5.1 channel system with 10 speakers and a subwoofer. Story 59. I have my 1990s VCR that I just hooked up again and started playing VHS tapes on. I also have a 1990s big box television that I think still works. I kind of want to hook it up in my office just for fun. I know my dad has some calculators from the 1980s that still work. Story 60. I have a radio cassette from the 80s. The radio works fine, but I do not have any cassettes anymore. I also have a portable digital versatile disc player. Story 61. A 150-pound cathode ray tube television set. Still has good color and sound. It is good for the basic stuff that high definition is not necessary for, like the news or old-school Nintendo games. Story 62. My Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Got it new for Christmas 1992. That majestic machine is still going. I have a multi-tap and still play Bomberman. Story 63. This was a good thought experiment. Maybe my Hewlett-Packard 12C financial calculator. Aside from general calculations, I can calculate future values and payments faster than any alternative. Reverse Polish notation is the way my brain thinks in calculating now, which makes normal calculations harder to use, but this little guy has earned a place on my desk for nearly 20 years. Story 64. I have a tire pressure gauge from the early 1900s, a Schrader Universal Tire Pressure Gauge from Schrader & Sons. I have a 1950s Snap-on stubby 3/8 ratchet that I still use. Mostly, I have old tools, to be honest. I almost ended up with my great-grandparents' cuckoo clocks from Austria that they brought with them when their parents immigrated to New York in the 1890s. Story 65. My double-edged razor and blades are over 120 years old technology. There is an active conversation happening at the subreddit Wicked Edge. Story 66. My grandmother's cast iron pan. She got it as a wedding gift about 80 years ago, and now I have it. I use it almost daily. Story 67. Well, I have various wheels around the house and on my vehicles. Those work pretty well. I have some fire that I use for various things. Story 68. I suppose it depends on how you define technology, but I have a third-generation iPod I regularly use when traveling, which contains much of my 2009 iTunes library, including all my BearShare, WinMX, Kazaa, LimeWire, CD Rips, Diminoid, the Pirate Bay, and other downloads. I am not sure how I would even manage to do that stuff today. There are so many great bootlegs not available on Spotify. I also still have and can use the MacBook Air gapped it is on. I have a 1980s Smith Corona typewriter I used to communicate with my friends and to write angry letters to companies and politicians. A hand-typed and mailed letter just hits different than an email or a call. It conveys a message like, "Wow, he was mad enough to buy a stand and get a typewriter out." I have a 1977 Puck Maxi moped, which is not technology, but I have a dwell meter and timing light from the 70s to set the timing on the bike. I prefer to think of these as proven technology rather than old technology. They take a little work, but they do their jobs well with simple electromechanical elegance. Story 69. A wrench and flathead screwdriver my grandfather used when working on Lancaster bombers at Bomber Command during World War II. Awesome kit, once used by heroes, now used by an idiot. Story 70. I have a Snap-on ratchet that I found in an old barn as a kid. I showed it to a Snap-on dealer, and he looked up the date code and determined that it was made sometime between 1942 and 1945 for the war effort. The gears were seized, but he was able to replace the internal parts. The parts for the modern ratchets, at least at that time in the late 1980s, were unchanged since at least the 1940s. Story 71. A couple of 1950s shotguns and rifles have been passed down to me. They still work just as well as they ever did and do not give up much of anything to a new one off the shelf. Story 72. Probably my great-grandfather's with splitting X. It doesn't need to be sharpened much at all if you've got the strength to swing it. It's from the 1800s. Story 73. I bought an extra-long charger from Sprint in 2009 that works in a car cigarette lighter and can be plugged into the wall. It also has a USB connection in the middle, but wait, there is more, and it has a USB Type-C connection. Incredible. Story 74. I have a Fitbit Aria Smart Scale that I bought in 2014, and it is working just fine. I also have an Intel Skull Canyon Next unit of computing from 2016 that is running my Plex media server. As long as it does not need additional software, I do not expect it to be obsoleted anytime soon. Story 75. My 1975 Electro Voice RE20 microphone. I have several fountain pens from the 1930s but have replaced the rubber sacks. Are film cameras obsolete? I have a 1930s Rolleicord twin-lens reflex camera that's a little finicky but works. Story 76. I have a wooden hand plane from the 1880s that works just as well as any hand plane today. Story 77. I have an electric hand mixer from the 1960s that still works, and I still use it. I see no real reason to replace it, as hand mixers are pretty much unchanged. Story 78. I do not know if it is technology per se, but I have had the same hand mixer for 35 years. My wife and I just used it to make chocolate chip cookies a few days ago. Story 79. The 100-year-old boiler in the basement of our home is cast iron, 6 feet tall, wrapped in asbestos, and will outlive me. Story 80. I have 2 working Commodore 64s. While some may say it is obsolete, I have a wireless internet modem and an SD card reader for it. Games are still actively made for it as well. Story 81. Fire keeps the cave warm. Fire makes meat taste good. Don't touch the fire, though. The fire hurt Pavlov's fingers. Story 82. I have my grandfather's pocket watch and percussion cap rifle. Both are from the 1800s and work just fine. Story 83. I have my dad's old slide rule. I can still work 3-digit multiplication problems on it faster than my son can on his high school calculator. Story 84. I have a pretty cool old toaster that cooks better than new ones, but won't do bagels. I also have an ancient electric waffle iron that flips into a sandwich press, and a 1940s or 50s blender with polished chrome. In the shop, There are lots of tools that haven't gotten any worse like new replacements have, and a Montgomery Ward freezer that isn't frost-free but has run continuously for about 40 years now. Story 85. I have a Laserdisc player from 1984 that still works, and a Laserdisc of Star Wars theatrical release with no new special effects. Story 86. 1974 Mini Moog Model D. 1981 Sequential Pro 1. Both of these synthesizers work perfectly and sound incredible. Story 87. I have an original Nintendo Entertainment System. It's the bundled Mario and Duck Hunt version with the blaster and all of the original packaging. It still works perfectly after 40 years. Story 88. Well, depending on your definition of tech, I have a copy of Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire from around 1846 that still works. Story 89. MacBook that I bought in 2016. I keep downloading updates, and it is my only computer, aside from my smartphone. Story 90. Define obsolete. I have a Windows 98 machine in my office that I play games on. I wouldn't recommend browsing the internet on it, though. Story 91. My speakers are Bose from the 1990s and Axiom from the early 2000s. They are still just as good as when I got them. Story 92. I built my personal computer in 2013 and still use it, even for some games. It is fast and runs Windows 11 well. Except for maybe the most demanding modern games, it seems to actually run most games well as well. It is 12 years old. Any other time that I can think of, if you had a personal computer for 12 years, it was borderline unusable after that time. Story 93. I have a video cassette recorder by Panasonic that is well over 30 years old. I wouldn't call it obsolete since we still have video home system tapes. It's too bad that Panasonic took so long to bring back televisions to the United States. I don't need one now, but I love Panasonic electronics. Story 94. I have an old desktop fan that belonged to my great-great-grandfather. I do not actually know how old it is, but it is probably from the 1920s or 1930s. It works incredibly well, but the blades are not really protected at all, so it is hidden away until the children are old enough to appreciate the importance of having fingers. Story 95. I have a really old broom. I have replaced the handle multiple times and the head multiple times as well. Story 96. I still have my high school stereo. It has a retro style, plays cassettes and CDs, and anything with an auxiliary input. It is about 28 years old now. Story 97. I have lots of old technology. None fit the question 100%, though. I will answer anyway. My tractor and its trailer are pretty old, work really well, though not as well as new, unfortunately, and are only a bit obsolete. It is a 1958 Fordson, and I restored it myself, including a total overhaul of the engine and axle. The axle is leaking again anyway. That thing is super stubborn and worn all around, but when it runs great, flawlessly, and pulls right away from the spot. Could still pull its weight on a farm, but for me, it's just a Sunday driver for fun. Adding to that, I have an old 1956 fire department pump trailer that someone converted into a sleeping trailer, which I use with my tractor. It is over 60 years old, but still has the original paint and metal frame and everything. Only the tow bar had to be swapped as it was broken in several places. It is pretty cool to use, though. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.